She came home, and he was gone. No note, no fight, just silence. It sounds like the ending of a movie, doesn't it? But for Nicole Kidman, this wasn't a scripted heartbreak. This was 2025, and her real life had finally fractured beyond repair. After nearly 25 years of picture-perfect appearances, shared awards season rituals, and interviews filled with soft-spoken affection, everything collapsed in a moment so quiet, it was deafening. She returned to a house that still smelled like him, but with closets emptied, his piano untouched, and the walls echoing with a kind of stillness that only follows betrayal. No confrontation, no warning, just absence. For nearly 2 decades, the world believed in the fairy tale. Hollywood royalty, country charm, mutual devotion. But beneath that image lived a far more complicated truth, one that Nicole had shielded from the public for years. And now, for reasons that became impossible to ignore, she was done protecting it. So what really happened behind the carefully filtered snapshots and the glowing red carpet smiles? What broke a woman who had already survived so much? And what exactly did she choose to reveal, now that the spotlight was finally hers alone? Let's find out. Hollywood's golden couple. They were supposed to be the exception. Nicole Kidman, ethereal, intelligent, endlessly poised, wasn't just another actress. She was a symbol of grace under pressure. A woman who had already endured the collapse of one high-profile marriage under the blinding spotlight of Scientology and stardom. And Keith Urban, the reformed country bad boy with a velvet voice and a past soaked in whiskey and relapse. Together, they weren't just a couple. They were a narrative people wanted, no, needed to believe in. When they married in June 2006, it felt like a reset proof that two people, broken in very different ways, could somehow create something unbreakable. Tabloids praised their rare stability. Fans called them the last real love story in Hollywood. Even their body language was studied as evidence of authentic intimacy. A touch here, a glance there. But here's the thing about perfection. It's often the most elaborate disguise. It looked like a fairy tale, but behind the curtains, I was exhausted, Nicole allegedly confided to a close friend. That confession wouldn't surface until much later. Long after the illusion had cracked beyond repair, what we saw were polished interviews and smiling award show photos. What we missed were the late-night arguments, the quiet tears, and the emotional weight Nicole carried alone. Behind every public moment, there was a private cost. They played their roles masterfully, the rock-solid couple who defied the odds. But at home, Nicole was the emotional caretaker, the fixer, the one holding things together, while also healing from past wounds she never really had time to process. Have you ever looked at a couple and thought they've figured it out? Maybe they haven't. Maybe they've just mastered the performance. And when the lights go off and the cameras stop rolling, that's when the real story begins. A love built on healing and hurt. They met in 2005, two Australians on separate but equally painful paths. Nicole was 38, still glowing from her Oscar win for The Hours, but privately haunted by the collapse of her marriage to Tom Cruise. What the public didn't see was how much that divorce had taken from her, not just emotionally, but maternally. She had lost not only a partner, but her connection to her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor, who remained with Cruise and his controversial world. She wasn't just looking for love. She was looking for family, for stability, for someone to stay. Keith Urban, then 37, was rising fast in the country scene. Charismatic, handsome, and talented, but behind the music was a man wrestling with his own demons. Substance abuse, relapse, insecurity. His songs had always hinted at pain, but Nicole saw more than that. She saw someone like her, familiar with loss, desperate for connection. Maybe that's why their bond felt so intense, so immediate. 2 fractured hearts convincing themselves that love could mean healing, and maybe even salvation. But healing, as Nicole would later learn, doesn't always look like holding hands in candlelit rooms. It can be chaotic, unequal, draining. Keith waited 4 months to call after their first meeting. When he finally did, the whirlwind began. By mid-2006, they were married. By October, he was in rehab. And Nicole, she didn't run, she held on, she forgave, she stood beside him. "I thought love meant standing by someone no matter what," she reflected years later. But love, real love, is a two-way current. The hidden battle. From the outside, they seemed invincible. Nicole and Keith appeared to be one of the few Hollywood couples who had cracked the code. Publicly, they adored each other. Keith once tearfully called her his saving grace during an award show speech. Nicole, in turn, credited him for bringing her back to life after years of public scrutiny and private grief. Together, they had 2 beautiful daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, and split their time between the spotlight of Los Angeles and the slower rhythm of Nashville. But here's the thing about love stories. The louder they're told in public, the more silent the suffering often is behind closed doors. Keith's music career exploded, but so did the demands. His tours grew longer, more intense. The kind of absence that starts small, a week here, a show there, turned into a lifestyle. And Nicole, who had built her life around presence and connection, felt increasingly like a character in someone else's narrative. She waited for texts, for calls, for simple signs that she still mattered in the quiet spaces between his stadium performances, and night after night, she fell asleep next to the same man, or rather, the space where he used to be, growing more alone in a marriage that looked full from the outside. He said he needed music to survive. She needed him to come home. But what happens when love becomes a one-person job? Nicole had always been the one to hold it together, the loyal partner, the emotional anchor. But when you're the only one pulling the weight, even the strongest person breaks. How long can you keep pretending the silence is just a phase, when deep down, you know it's becoming permanent? Performance over partnership. By their 10th anniversary, the magic that once defined Nicole and Keith's relationship had quietly morphed into something far more calculated, a performance. What was once raw connection had become rehearsed choreography. Smiles were timed for the cameras, compliments were delivered like scripted lines, even their silences began to feel practiced. They didn't just live together, they marketed together. Magazine covers dubbed them Hollywood's last real marriage. Paparazzi shots showed coordinated airport outfits, subtle touches, and matching grins. Every public appearance seemed to whisper, "See? We're still perfect." But perfection comes at a price, and it was Nicole who was paying it. Behind the scenes, she was emotionally threadbare. Years of defending him, forgiving relapses, holding the family together while managing her own career. It had left her drained. Her identity as a wife had slowly swallowed her identity as a woman. And worse, she felt invisible. Keith, meanwhile, had grown restless. Being seen as the man who was always rescued didn't sit well with him. The praise he once cherished became pressure. He didn't want to be saved anymore, especially not by someone whose strength only highlighted his weakness. "We became characters in our own marriage," one close friend said. They weren't living together, they were performing together. A marriage where authenticity is replaced by optics, where connection is replaced by applause, where your partner becomes your co-star. And when love becomes performance, the heart quietly begins to exit stage left, long before the body ever does. The breaking point. In early 2024, Nicole Kidman was thousands of miles from home, immersed in filming Practical Magic 2 in London. Long shooting days, night scenes in cold rain, endless rewrites, but despite the physical exhaustion, she kept telling friends she was looking forward to going home. Home meant safety, stability. Keith, or at least that's what she believed. Back in Nashville, Keith was telling a very different story. While Nicole threw herself into work, Convinced she and Keith were simply navigating another rough patch, he was quietly packing up pieces of their life. Not dramatically, not emotionally, methodically. He told close friends he needed space to figure things out, a phrase people often use when they've already made the decision but haven't found the courage or decency to say it out loud. There was no fight, no final conversation, no attempt to salvage what almost 20 years had built. Just a slow, silent exit. When Nicole finally returned from London, she walked into a home that didn't feel like hers anymore. Closets half empty. His guitars gone. The framed photos of them as a family removed from the walls. Even the scent of him, the cologne he used before every performance, had faded. It wasn't a metaphor, it was literal abandonment. And perhaps the cruelest part? She had no idea that while she was still rehearsing Hope, he had already signed the divorce papers weeks earlier. His signature wasn't just ink on a page. It was a message. I'm done. And I'm done alone. Have you ever poured yourself into fixing something, only to discover the other person walked away long before you noticed the door closing? That's not heartbreak. That's devastation with paperwork attached. And for Nicole, it was the moment she realized the illusion hadn't just cracked, it had completely collapsed. The public unraveling. Nicole stayed silent. At first, it wasn't weakness, it was instinct. For nearly 2 decades, she had protected the image, the story, the man. Even when things were falling apart behind closed doors, she remained gracious in interviews, always choosing her words carefully, always maintaining dignity. To the outside world, she was composed. But inside, she was breaking. So when the divorce finally hit the headlines, Nicole said nothing. No statements, no social media hints, no public tears. Silence became her only form of control. But then, Keith took the stage. Just days after the news broke, he performed in Pennsylvania. A concert that fans expected to be emotional, maybe even respectful. But there was no wedding ring on his hand, no dedication to Nicole, no sign of mourning. Instead, he altered the lyrics of a once tender love song, a ballad that many believed was originally written for her. "Take your space and take your unreasonable reasons," he sang. The crowd went quiet. Then came the gasps. It wasn't just a performance. It was a message sharp, public, calculated. In one verse, he turned the woman who had stood by him for years into the villain of his story. No context, no nuance, just a rewritten script that erased her loyalty and painted himself as the one left behind. Nicole watched it unfold like a stranger watching her own life adapted into someone else's song. He wasn't just moving on, he was reframing the narrative, and she wasn't in control of it anymore. Nicole speaks without speaking. While Keith stood on stage rewriting their story through altered lyrics and passive jabs, Nicole chose something far more unsettling in Hollywood: restraint. But make no mistake, her silence wasn't passive. Het was strategisch. In a culture that rewards oversharing and spectacle, Nicole's refusal to engage publicly became a statement in itself. No late-night interviews, no Instagram captions shaded with bitterness, no anonymous sources close to her leaking retaliation. She didn't fight fire with fire, she drowned it in composure. And yet, the world kept watching, waiting for a crack, for some confirmation of pain, of betrayal, of anger. It finally came, quietly. In an October 2025 Vogue cover story, Nicole opened up in a way only she could, soft-spoken but devastating. When asked about where she was emotionally, she replied, almost to herself, "How many times do you have to be taught that you think you know where your life is going, and then it isn't going in that direction?" That wasn't a soundbite, it was a wound with a voice. The quote didn't name Keith, it didn't need to. The weight of it spoke volumes, a woman reflecting not just on heartbreak, but on the realization that love, no matter how fiercely you protect it, cannot survive on protection alone. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a reckoning. And in a world where shouting often drowns out truth, Nicole's silence became the only voice that mattered. When the divorce papers became public, many expected Nicole to seek what most celebrities do in high-profile breakups: financial compensation, asset division, public vindication. But instead of millions, she asked for something far more personal and far more revealing: time. Specifically, 306 days a year with her daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret. Not because she wanted to exclude Keith, not to punish him, but because she understood, better than most, what absence can do to a child. You see, Nicole had already lived this once. After her divorce from Tom Cruise, she lost regular contact with her two adopted children, Isabella and Connor. Raised within the tight grip of Scientology, they eventually grew distant, emotionally and physically. Nicole, a mother by every definition but proximity, was forced to watch from afar as her bond with them faded into silence. She knew what it felt like to lose your children, not through death or disaster, but through decisions made when they were too young to understand. And she swore it would never happen again. So when Keith left, abruptly, silently, Nicole's priority became crystal clear: protect the emotional continuity of her daughters. While the marriage was dissolving, she refused to let her girls be collateral damage. She didn't want the money. She wanted mornings and meals, school runs and movie nights, the everyday moments that become the glue in a child's memory of family. Because when a home fractures, someone has to keep the roof from collapsing entirely. And Nicole, with all her pain and poise, chose to be that someone. Not just a woman who lost a husband, but a mother determined not to lose again. The final blow. Friends say the real heartbreak wasn't the moment Keith left. It was the slow, invisible erosion that happened long before the door ever closed. Nicole had sensed it: the growing distance, the missed calls, the way his responses became colder, more delayed. But like many people in long relationships, she mistook detachment for distraction. She thought they were simply going through a season, one that required patience, not panic. But the truth was harder. By the time she realized how far gone he was emotionally, Keith had already built a life of silence. Conversations turned into logistics, affection into formalities. And then came the music, his 2024 album, High and Alive, which included lyrics that felt eerily specific, too specific. Lines that mirrored private arguments they'd once had, phrases pulled from text messages no one else had read. Intimate moments turned into content. When Nicole confronted him, hoping for clarity, or even just honesty, he didn't deny it. He didn't say anything at all. And that silence? It spoke louder than any chorus. But the emotional blow didn't end there. Whispers began to circulate, not the first time in their marriage, but now harder to dismiss. A younger woman from Keith's touring crew, long nights on the road, hotel bookings that overlapped in questionable ways, fleeting glances captured in backstage photos. Nicole had weathered rumors before. It's part of surviving in Hollywood. But this time, even those closest to her noticed her pause when asked about it. She didn't need to confirm it. The hurt in her eyes was confirmation enough. Because for a woman who had devoted herself fully, who had forgiven, waited, supported, and sacrificed, betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was humiliating. And for the first time, she couldn't cover for him anymore. Not broken, just done. Despite everything, the silence, the emotional abandonment, the public rewriting of their story, Nicole never lashed out. No tabloid exclusives, no bitter interviews, no carefully veiled lyrics aimed back at him. She could have exposed him. She had every reason to, but she didn't. Because her power never came from retaliation, it came from restraint. She chose to stay in Nashville. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Her daughters needed stability, a sense that even if their parents' love story ended, their family didn't have to fall apart completely. Nicole made sure that their world, their home, their school, their routines remained intact. She didn't stay because she was stuck. She stayed because she had finally found freedom in stillness. For nearly 2 decades, she carried the emotional weight of a marriage that demanded more of her than it gave back. She protected Keith's image, softened the truth, absorbed the damage. But after all that, she reached a quiet conclusion. She wasn't broken. She was just done. Done covering for someone who had long stopped covering for her. Done confusing loyalty with self-erasure. Done mistaking endurance for love. Years earlier, she once said, "You can't control life. You can only live it." And now, she's finally living it. Not as a role, not as a symbol, not as someone's wife, but as Nicole. Whole, quietly powerful, and finally free to write a story that's hers alone.